This is Matthew calling from Malta. Ex-Londoner, now back in my home country, pretty much after Brexit. My question, what if? What if David Miliband was elected Labour leader as opposed to his brother Ed Miliband? Think about it. No millstone with a manifesto, no bacon sandwich disasters, no hell yeah I'm strong enough in front of Jeremy Paxman.
To quote Joe Scaping, one of my favourite Green Party comrades, approach the world with the same level of intellectual incuriosity as a centrist dad who thinks that David Miliband would have won in 2015.
I wonder what would have happened. Something tells me that David Miliband would have resonated much stronger than his brother with voters, and perhaps there might never have been Brexit. But we're all waiting to hear what you think, so over to...
And of course, it wouldn't be a caller in to the centrist podcast industrial complex without framing literally everything around Brexit.
To you. Love the show. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Matthew from Malta, for that question.
The most popular question, by the way, I think we've had.
It is, isn't it? And it was such a fascinating period of this kind of Cain and Abel struggle between two brothers for, who was going to lead the Labour Party.
And a good what if, because it was so narrow. Literally a few votes in the trade union bloc of the Electoral College of that time, and it would have been David Miliband.
Well, if David Miliband had just got a handful more MPs, he would have won. Yeah. And there were various people, one of whom I was with at the weekend, actually, who was, who David Miliband never bothered to contact. And there was a sort of I know David very well, and I would say he's a kind of friend of mine. And I think that he made mistakes in his campaigning. And I think that, I know it is...
Maybe his mistakes when campaigning were being totally insufferable, and by not having any shared values with anyone in the Labour movement. Yeah, maybe it's sort of interesting that their line on David Miliband is, well, maybe if he'd won over more MPs, or the trade unions weren't as in favour of him as Ed Miliband. What about people within the Labour Party who do not share any level of politics with David Miliband, and maybe at least slightly shared some politics with Ed Miliband, the supposed compromised candidate from the kind of hard right-wing sect of the Labour Party, from the Blairite faction that David Miliband belonged to, exceeded from draconian shit when he was in government.
Always easy to say, God, if only David Miliband had won the Labour leadership, everything would have been different. Actually, David had various opportunities along the way and didn't quite seize them. And when his brother entered the race, he was too hands-off and had been Foreign Secretary and was maybe a tiny bit too aloof imperious, and not speaking to enough people, schmoozing them, putting his arm around them and saying, I really need your support.
I was presenting the BBC Two special for the leadership on the day that both brothers merged, and I was with somebody who I won't name, who is still at the BBC, who was watching the two brothers' faces and said, oh, look, David Miliband's really smiling. He's definitely won it, before they came up. And I said, yeah. You don't smile if you've just won it and your brother's standing there. That means he's lost. And Ed Miliband was looking very troubled and sort of concerned, probably thinking about their mum. And obviously, as soon as it was announced, it was clear that Ed Miliband had been covering up the fact that he knew he'd won, and David Miliband was covering up the fact that he knew he'd lost, and history was written. The thing I would say, and I think people forget this, is that David...
And again, they keep saying history was written. It was just a different Miliband brother. Again, we're putting so much emphasis on the supposed great people in history, as if they are as relevant as the economic heads or tailwinds, or the broad state of the country, or people's material conditions. No. The big difference is whether or not that you have the slightly geeky brother or the draconian monster brother.
Miliband, in retrospect, seems like the stronger character, but he pulled his punches on a couple of occasions, which I think were quite memorable. One was when he thought he would take on Gordon Brown, and it was a year earlier, just the beginning of the summer, and he wrote this article for The Guardian. Do you remember this?
Absolutely.
And everyone kind of girded their loins. Is that the phrase? They were sort of waiting for the attack. It's like, oh, this is it. He's written the piece. He's going to go for it.
Do you gird any other part of your body, or is it only your loins?
No, I
is that
don't
another
know
what
how
if?
you gird.
I don't know.
What if we girded our loins? Yeah.
But that was the moment, I think, where people thought he's going to strike. The
and this is
iron
when
is
Brown
hot.
was really unpopular.
Brown was really
and there
unpopular.
was a second occasion.
Right. And for everyone talking about the bacon sandwich.
She had the banana moment.
Yeah, exactly. The banana. David. They've all got these weird moments of standing with inanimate objects.
He was
David
photographing the
Miliband,
banana.
photograph of the banana. The year before, the October before, at the conference.
But there was
at Labour
also,
I think
Conference.
it sunk him.
but there was the,
And it's just, honestly, from the kind of popular support within the party that people on our side had, like Jeremy Corbyn, it's just funny to hear these people discussing people from the supposedly kind of populist party, what should be a populist party, the mass movement Democratic Socialist Party, going, well, they had this conniving plan to oust the leader by playing this political game. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, I don't want any of these people leading the country. These sound like the absolute dirt worst people to put in charge of an incredibly powerful nation, these conniving bastards.
was the moment of the kind of the failed coup, which is when James Pennell resigned from Gordon Brown's government. He was Work and Pensions Secretary at the time.
On the day of the local elections.
Was a Blairite minister in a Brown government, and this was meant to be the firing of the starting gun. I don't think it had ever been plotted. I think James assumed that David would think, right, this is my moment.
Yeah.
This is where I declare my... And he didn't, and he did it.
Exactly.
And would he? Wouldn't he?
And
so-
politics is all about. It's not just
Seizing
about
the moment.
Yeah, it's not
He
just
could
about
have
the
been
right
Prime Minister
person.
then. I'm gonna say, I don't know, you two might disagree. I think this is one of the most overblown what ifs of recent political history.
See, Lewis Goodall with the correct take once again.
Because I think actually I find it very difficult to see any other circumstance in which things hadn't been exactly the same. I think things would have been exactly the same. And I think that for a few reasons. One is what you've already alluded to, which is actually people forget now that David Miliband, who is, very accomplished man, as you say, John, very clever, all those sort of things, he had a lot of political frailties and weaknesses, which partly led him not to get the actual either the premiership or the leadership in the first place, right? And it's very easy to be king over the water. People forget now that in 2010, one of the reasons that people started talking up Ed Miliband was the idea that David Miliband was aloof, that he was robotic, that he was difficult. And Ed, in that famous phrase...
I mean, what about the fact that he's a monster? Did you ever consider the fact that he did loads of draconian, awful stuff as a minister? That's why no one in the Labour Party liked him very much, outside of the Blairite MPs who absolutely fawned over the guy.
It was said, talks human, right? So you would have had a situation in which David Miliband's political frailties would have been there rather than Ed. But the other reason, I think, if we're talking big picture, i.e. would the 2015 general election have been different? My argument would be to say, no, it wouldn't. Because the big driving factors of the 2015 general election were twofold. One was that the Labour Party was still very much associated with the financial crash, and Miliband, David, would have been probably even more associated with it because he was more senior in the government. And secondly, it was a Scotland referendum of 2014.
No, it wasn't. Oh, you almost there. You were almost there, Lewis. I think there is something to say about the links between Labour and the financial crash, but I actually don't think it went as deep as that. I don't think people really tried to rag on Labour too much, considering that after the financial crash, actually, Brown's polling numbers weren't that bad. And the election, when if they really did blame Labour for the global financial crisis, they would have given David Cameron a landslide. If they genuinely thought that Labour was so bad at governance that it warranted a complete change in government, right? Believing that your current government is so bad with the economy they crash it overnight, you don't deliver a hung parliament. You just don't. So the idea that Labour's loss in 2015 was down to people's worries about Labour's fiscal responsibility after the financial crisis, I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. The actual reason that Labour lost in 2015 was incredibly simple. It's far more simple than the perspective of what happened to the Labour Party, of whether it's Ed or David Miliband, or anything with regards to the personalities behind the party or party image. There is one single driving force that won David Cameron the election in 2015, and it was because interest rates were low. That's it. Case closed. Only thing that mattered. Now, Labour certainly lost loads of ground in Scotland, but they could win literally every seat. Every single seat in Scotland could have been won by the Labour Party, and they still would have lost. Cameron still would have had a majority. Scotland was important for losing Labour control of that part of the country to the SNP. The SNP growth in the election, sure, that was down to the politics of the referendum. But in England and Wales, in the areas where Labour didn't win the support that everyone said that they were going to win in the run-up to the election, the reason why they didn't win any of that was because interest rates were low. George Osborne did QE and gave all the money to the city. People poured that money into the housing market and the asset market like financial instruments. It drove growth, which was completely illusory as it didn't pass down to people who would regularly vote Labour. Kind of people who were already homeowners, so part of the swing demographic, the mortgage market, aspirational class. From 2010 to 2015, they saw their house rise in value and their mortgage stay cheap, or they got a new mortgage with a low rate because interest rates were essentially zero the entirety of the time where they were in government. They went from 2010, my house is cheap, my mortgage is cheap, to 2015, my house is expensive, but my mortgage is cheap, and therefore they voted Conservative. It is literally no more complex for those areas in England and Wales where the Labour Party's image was irrelevant and where Scottish politics was irrelevant is because their mortgage was cheap and their house increased in value. It's as simple as that. There were so many parts of the country that were absolutely destroyed by the Conservative Party's austerity agenda, absolutely, completely torn apart, having their insides ripped out. But they always voted Labour anyway. They were the Labour voting constituent. They were the Labour voting demographics that relied on the public sector. The Conservative government didn't need to care. They didn't need to care at all about the areas that were affected badly by austerity until, of course, the Brexit vote happened. No, they didn't have to care. All they had to care about was the swing demographic, and first past the post, it is the swing demographic that matters. And the swing demographic are home owners, mortgage holders. How do you keep mortgage holders happy? You keep interest rates low. Look what happened at the last election. Interest rates go up under Liz Truss. Mortgage holders who previously voted Conservative from 2010 until 2019, as soon as those mortgage rates go up after the Liz Truss mini-budget, immediately they turn to Labour. The election in 2024 was already solved. It was already lost by the Conservative Party on the day of the mini-budget. As soon as those homeowners, those mortgage holders saw their mortgage rates go up, they were not going to vote for the Conservative Party. It's as simple as that. In the same way that those same group of people, that same sector, that same demographic, that same cohort within the electorate, saw their mortgage rates stayed the same from 2010 to 2015, doesn't matter that the poor people had died, didn't matter that the country was being torn apart, it didn't matter that the social fabric was being destroyed, because I got mine. My house is expensive. I have gained housing equity, but my mortgage rate is still in the lowest it's been ever. That's the lowest the base rate has ever been in the UK during the austerity period. And of course, austerity helped that. For every vote that they potentially couldn't have won because austerity destroyed the social fabric or the public sector that one sector of the electorate relied on, that same austerity manufactured low interest rates that benefited the affluent, aspirational, mortgage-owning class that helped them win the election in 2015. So unless David Miliband can magic higher interest rates out of the fucking ether, there was no way Labour were winning that election. No way at all. Because every single poll that was done that showed Miliband ahead, that showed Labour ahead from 2010 to 2015, that was all the political rigmarole of everything in the background and votes on Syria and the Lansley reforms and austerity broadly and then the riots, loads of things that politically in the news made people think that Labour were a better option. But when it came to polling day, when it came to the actual day of the election, and someone looked at the ballot paper and thought, do I want 5 more years of low interest rates and cheap housing on mortgage rates? They just said yes. It's no more complex than that. It's absolutely no more complex than that. And as absolutely right in chat from Atomic Power, and all that time, the entire time the Tories had convinced the public that we needed to cut, when it was the exact opposite, we could have done as much investing in the country as you like with an 0% interest rate, they understood that any amount of investment that they did could potentially have raised the interest rate, and they might have lost them the 2015 election. If the Conservative Party had been better with the economy, they might have lost the election. And that is a problem with first past the post and the prioritisation of a swing demographic, is that their material interests were so diametrically opposed to the rest of the electorate, it made the Conservative government do stupid economics to try and win. That's the unfortunate reality of 2015. So whilst Lewis Goodall is correct that a different Miliband would have made no difference, it was nothing to do with Scotland, it was nothing to do with Labour's image to the public, and it was everything to do with the material conditions of the important swing voters in 2015. And the Conservatives knew this. George Osborne absolutely knew this, and hence why they kept manufacturing low interest rates to keep the aspirational class happy. And it destroyed the country.
And that would have been exactly the same. I don't think there would have been any prospect with David Miliband leading that you still wouldn't have had the SNP winning 56 of 59 seats. And I don't think there would have been any prospect, therefore, that David Cameron wouldn't have been able to do exactly what he did, which is to say, as they did with Ed Miliband, David Miliband will be in Alex Salmond's pocket. You need to vote Conservative in England. I think
The idea that anyone in England, the idea, Lewis, that anybody in the entirety of England and Wales were looking at the election, were looking at their polling card in the polling booth going, oh, coalition of chaos with Ed Miliband. Like, I'm sorry, this is Westminster journo lobby brain nonsense. Get your head out of the lobbies and get your head into where everybody in the country who mattered electorally was thinking about the future of the country. And it was nothing to do with whether or not there was going to be a deal between Ed Miliband and Alex Salmond, and it's entirely down to my mortgage rate is low. What do you think a regular person is more concerned with? How much they pay for housing, or whether or not there might be a backroom deal between Ed Miliband and Alex Salmond? It's absolute Westminster lobby-brained garbage to think that one of those two, the former, is less relevant. For the same reason that 40% of the country voted for Jeremy Corbyn, even though Theresa May went with the exact same line, the coalition of chaos with Corbyn and Sturgeon. Did that line work in 2017? No. So what universe would that have worked in 2015? I'm sorry, it was material conditions. It always is. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.